Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland and the Spirit of Winona. Today's show marks the 200th show I've created for HBC and for you, the viewers of the show. We here at HBC Cable Television thought it fitting that the 200th show tell a story about the show itself. Therefore, today's show will be a review, so to speak, about what has taken place over the last 8 years in the development of the show and in creating a video time capsule of sorts about the first decade of the 21st century in Winona, Minnesota, and the heartland that surrounds it.
Hi, I'm Mary Malloy. I'm the General Manager of HBC's local origination programming station, and with me here today is Joyce Woodworth. And you know, Joyce was talking to me the other day and said, you know, I'm going to be doing my 200th Spirit show. And I thought, wow, 200 shows, that's a lot of shows, that's a lot of producing. And Joyce has been producing this show for about 8 years now. Isn't that about right, Joyce?
Exactly, 8 years.
How did you ever get started doing a show like this?
Well, it's a long story. I'll try and condense it. Well, 8 years ago when I began, I hadn't really had much experience in the TV world. However, I've been involved with Winona since I was born. I love Winona. I grew up here. And I think the CEO here at HBC recognized that fact. And how I started talking with him, I guess I should say, to me, it's synchronicity. Because he was looking for someone to do a show here, and I was looking for something to do. So we got together, and that's how it started. Now, if you want to delve a little bit more about how that happened. Well, I do, because
first of all, I want to know, I mean, was television part of your background? I mean, did you go to school to learn how to produce television programming? How did you get involved in it?
Well, I really didn't, but I think they were looking for someone here that knew the people, knew Winona, because the story really is about Winona. It's not about me, it's about Winona and all the wonderful things that go on here. But my background was, I grew up in Winona, I went to college here, and then I was a school teacher. And I did that for many years. I did a lot of volunteer work. And in 2000, my daughter was in middle school. My sons had graduated from college, and I thought, from high school. I'm not that old.
I was going to do the math, but I thought, no, don't try.
They had just graduated from high school, and they were in college, and I thought, now is the time to get back into the career world and start something new. Back in the 60s, I actually did have some television experience. I started modeling for IBM and doing things for the very first computers that ever was. And then I modeled also in Chicago and did some television spots there. So I had a little bit in front of the camera work, but nothing editing or anything like that. So when I started here in 2000, I had to learn everything because I'm also the editor and the producer, the director, and host the show. So I do everything. So I really had to start from ground one. And my mentor actually was a person that worked here then. He had 18 years of television experience. That was Chris Auerbach. And he taught me how to edit on the Media 100 edit system and how to put an interesting show together. So I learned from that point on all about television.
You wouldn't have thought you went from teaching school, into television. So you developed your skills over time, but what was that very first show? And how did you pick the subject?
Well, the beginning, when I started in 2000, I actually started for the news program. Wayne Valentine was doing a daily news program, and they wanted to spruce up the program and bring in a woman's point of view. So that's how I started, and it was just a 3 to 5 minute segment. And I started around Wyndham Park. My very first show was around Wyndham Park. And we can pause a minute, and I'll show you what that show is like.
Sounds good.
Do you ever feel like living in Winona is like living at the end of the rainbow? The beauty surrounding us, the kind people that live here, the simple way of life. I've lived here all my life, and I've come to appreciate the many good things that Winona has to offer. I'd like to share some of these features with you on my weekly television segments on the Local View with Wayne Valentine. My segments will be entitled The Spirit of Winona, and they will be aired on Tuesdays and Thursdays each week. I'm starting right here, practically in the center of town in Wyndham Park.
I'm sitting in front of the statue of Princess Winona, and who better represents the spirit of Winona than her? As we follow her gaze across the street and then circle around the park, we see the homes of our founding fathers and mothers, the people who helped establish our beautiful city. We see Louise and Herbert Garvin's home. They gave this land to the city to develop this park, as well as many acres of bluff land and land surrounding the lake and river. As we circle around the park, we see the spot where William Wyndham built his home. Mr. Wyndham provided the funds to maintain the park, which would be named after him. The Queen Anne home we come to next is the original home of Francis and Frederick Bell, who gave the bandshell to the city. The next homes we come to were all built or occupied by lumber barons of Winona. The Yeoman's home, the Lamberton home, which is the oldest built home on the square, actually built by Henry Huff in 1857, and the Lucas home, which held the Red Cross organization for many years. Tucked around the new condominiums, but part of the original homes across from the park, sits the Choate home. This home originally had a huge yard, which now holds a group of condos, and a beautiful brick home, which is a transplant from 5th Street. We end at the Dutch home, also built by lumber baron Lamberton, as a wedding gift to his daughter, Mariella. Over the next few weeks, I will take you into several of these homes to see the unique features of each home, to understand a little of the history of the home, and to meet the current occupants. It should be great fun. Till then, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Enjoy the Spirit of Winona.
After this introduction to the Spirit of Winona, which aired in May of 2000, 25 short segments were produced to air on the daily news program, one half of which were inside the grand homes around Wyndham Park. It was in these historical homes that the seeds were planted for future Spirit programs. I discovered the importance of telling about the history of this area, showing the beauty, sharing the stories, and most of all, meeting and talking with the people. I was particularly impressed with the graciousness of everyone I interviewed and their willingness to share their knowledge and stories with me. This has proven to be the case in all 200 shows I have compiled. The value of these short segments were recognized by the viewers and by HBC, and after 3 months, the Spirit of Winona became its own show.
The Spirit of Winona is your hometown show. I will try to present to you shows of interest to you, shows about our history, about our heritage, about our culture, about our people, and about our passions, and of course about our special happenings in Winona. They will at one time or another appeal to every person in Winona, man or woman, boy or girl, or youth or elderly. They will also be educational, interesting, and fun. They will show the spirit of Winona. Winona is filled with interesting stories, some touching and some exciting and fun. On my weekly shows, I will bring these stories to you. Together, we can keep the spirit of Winona alive, and we can keep Winona an enviable city to live in. My first show coming up in August will be a garden series. I will take you into some beautiful hidden gardens in Winona, and we will meet the creators of the gardens, and we will also learn ways of beautifying our own gardens. Shows shortly thereafter will be a series on the Winona Middle School. We will see the last days of use in the old middle school and see the new school in session. We will also be saying goodbye to a long-time industry in Winona. We will be learning about some first-hand war experiences from some Korean War veterans from Winona. If you have a passion you want to share, or if you know of a special happening that should be shared with all of Winona, I want you to call me at HBC.
Today, you can call me at 474-5702 or email me at joycew@hbci.com.
Join me for my first show on August 5th at 10 a.m. in the morning. I'm Joyce Woodworth. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.
Tell me about the first show that you ever did.
Well, the first half-hour show, I went with Sharon Ropes, who's now our senator, and we met in Wyndham Park, and she talked all about Wyndham Park and all the flowers, the winter garden and the summer garden and the spring garden. And then from there on, I did about 6 garden shows. So those were my very, very first shows.
Now, for those that have been watching your program for a very long time, we know that the original name of the show was Spirit of Winona, but now it's Spirit of the Heartland. Tell me about the change.
Well, the change happened in 2005 because for 5 years, from 2000 till 2005, it was about Winona and being connected with HBC Cable. Our cable company just reached out to the Winona area. But then in 2005, things started happening at HBC, and they started spreading out into other communities. And as you know, now we're in Wabasha and St. Charles, and we'll be soon in Lewiston and Stockton, etc.
We are. So
Great.
the footprint has grown considerably
the footprint is
since
definitely growing.
You started.
Yeah.
So you changed the name to Spirit of the Heartland to better fit the scope of our viewers.
Exactly, just to encompass more shows in wider areas.
Okay.
And actually, I'm going to be going off into another country this year and doing a story in Vietnam. So we really are spreading out, and that's just because there is a Winona connection with that. The senior high school kids raised money to build a school there, so we'll be doing that as well.
You might be an international correspondent here before too long. There's an awful lot. Being in the business myself, I know that there's an awful lot that goes into the preparation of producing a show, into the scripting, into the whole development of a storyline. So tell us a little bit about how you do that and how much time it takes you to produce a show.
Well, the time really varies on the type of show. Now I have 13 categories of Spirit of the Heartland and Spirit of Winona shows, and they range from art and crafts and cooking shows, history documentaries, events, performances, interviews, tours. Anyway, there's 13 categories, and each one varies a little bit. I think I'll measure that with the show that takes the longest to do, and that would be a historical documentary, because there I have to come up with the idea and do all the research for the show, then do the filming of the show, and then piecing it together with a lot of voiceovers, making sure I have the facts right. So that might take up to 60, 70, 80 hours to do a show like that. Whereas a show such as a cooking show where everything's all prepared and I have a wonderful cook with me and they show us how to prepare something, that might take 20 hours. So it really does vary.
But now some of your programs, we say it's a half-hour magazine format program, but really some of your shows are longer than a half an hour because you have several segments to them.
True, some of them do have 2 parts, but I generally try to stay within 2 parts if it's about one subject.
Okay, so you just do them back to back in the weeks.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so once you have all the footage, all the research is done, you have all the footage shot that you think you need, how do you go about figuring out what to use of all that footage and all that information you've gathered?
Well, you know, I'd like to take you all into my studio right now and show you,
fun.
in the edit suite, and show you exactly how it gets all put together.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Well, welcome to my edit studio. This is where I create all the shows I produce for the Spirit of Winona and the Spirit of the Heartland shows. And I'll give you a little brief description of what I do here. First of all, I have to start with a tape, and this would be the tape that my camera person has taped the show on, and it's on a digital videotape. And I would insert this into a deck, which is right up here, and all the material that's recorded on there then would have to be put into my computer. And I use the Media 100 editing system, which is very simple and a wonderful program. Once it's digitized and recorded into my computer program, I would break it up into little tiny windows over here, and then take each window as I need it and pull it over here into a program timeline. In this program section is a variety of tracks. I have a video line, I have the audio line, I have a music line, and I have to sequence everything into something that makes sense. After the show is complete, I record it on a DV cam tape to keep as a master, and then I also record it on a SVHS tape and give it off to Justin Barrientos, who puts it into the system where it goes off into the air and you get to view it. And now we'll go talk to Justin and see how that's done. Now the SVHS is ready, and I'm going to hand it over to Justin Barrientos, who's going to tell us how it goes off into the TV land.
That's right. Thank you, Joyce. When she gives me the tape, I input the time that she puts on the tape into the computer, and then we head off into the automation room. And here in our automation room, each one of these decks is associated with a certain show. So I'll take this tape and I'll put it in the Spirit of the Heartland deck, and then it comes to you. At least that's the way it was for the first 200 shows. Next 200 will have a different system to bring it to you.
You know, that was really interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of folks at home that are watching that say to themselves, wow, what? I really wasn't sure how that happened, and so now they have a little inside knowledge of what goes on when they produce a show. So
Sure, I hope so.
Really neat. Joyce, one of the things I think our audience doesn't know is how many awards that the Spirit of the Heartland, Spirit of Winona show has actually received in recognition of your work. The numbers have got to be up there.
Well, I believe it's about 14 or 15 right now. And
a couple of those are silver tellies.
Yes, and silver telly is really like the top notch in our industry.
It is. It's very prestigious for both you and the studio here at HBC, and we're real proud of that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
One of those actually was for the Coca-Cola Company, and the other one was for the Alexander House, which, you know, both were great shows and brought out a really interesting story.
And in completely different genres, really.
Yeah,
both
really.
a little bit historical, but a company and a bed and breakfast.
So
Is there any of those that you won awards for that's like the most memorable? There's something that happened in the program that you recall that made it so memorable?
Mary's question took me to the award-winning Alexander Home Spirit Show, which aired in 2006. The inside of the home, which is done in exquisite Victorian-style fashion, held a very personal story for me because my mother worked as a maid in the home as a young woman, fresh off the farm. She had relayed many stories to me of her experiences serving a prominent family in the city. It was very emotional for me to walk in the same rooms she had tended many years before I was born. And such an honor for me to learn that the current owners of the bed and breakfast have actually named one of their guest rooms after my mother. We're now in Maid Mary's room, and I just have to tell you, my mom worked here when she was in her 20s, and she worked for Mrs. Alexander, Maud Alexander, and I think Maud and her became friends.
Right.
And she had such cute stories about the Alexander family from the maid's point of view when she lived here. She was telling me about Mrs. Alexander and how she liked to have everything very, very elegant. And when she served dinners, my mom and her best friend Bertha, who was also a maid here, would prepare for the dinners, and they would do things like peel the green grapes so that they could serve those as a dessert or between courses or whatever. But can you imagine peeling a grape? The story of the Alexander home is a perfect example of the house tours presented on the Spirit shows. Much of the architecture of the Heartland is well preserved from the eras of its first European settlement by the industrious and attentive people living here, making each tour a history documentary as well as a tour of a gracious home. Some businesses in this area also have a rich heritage, which is evident in the other Silver Telly Award-winning show, the Coca-Cola Bottling Company. How do you make the Coca-Cola? Do you still do it the same way they did it back in 1932?
We do basically.
Each show produced for Spirit turns into a learning experience, whether it's about how a company makes the nation's soda pop, how a sweater is produced, how Watkins makes their liniment, or how a flower grows. The stories in the Heartland surround us and are unfolded in the 1/2-hour Spirit shows.
Well, let's talk a little bit about maybe your favorite show that you've done. You've had 200, so I know it's going to be hard to pick a specific one, but off the top of your head, what might be your favorite show?
Wow, you know, I'd have to say every single one is one of my special shows, because every one I learned so much about some subject I didn't know anything about, or I learned something about some person that I didn't know about, and everybody has a story to tell. But if you really want something that's kind of unique, I think one of my unique shows that stays with me is the show that I did on Ben and Myrtle Huntley. And this was a couple that I never knew existed. And I happened to be looking through the Historical Society's newsletter, and they mentioned something about Myrtle and Ben Huntley. So I went over to talk with Mark Peterson, and who's a wonderful resource. That Historical Society is a great resource for me for the shows. But he was telling me that they were invited to come to Myrtle's grandson's home, where he had all the memorabilia from this couple. And they had boxes and boxes, and some of these boxes had never been gone through before. So I had the opportunity to go through these boxes and unfold the story about this couple that lived in Winona way back at the turn of the century. And this man actually began filming in Winona. They had a vaudeville show that they traveled around the world with, or around this area, I should say, around the Midwest with. And the story behind the two of them and the great love that they had for each other, this all came out in this story, and I was able to do a 2-part show on this with some of the film that he actually still had. We still had at the Historical Society that he had taped.
What an opportunity.
Fascinating.
Yeah, what a great
fascinating
opportunity. What kinds of programs do we have coming up in the future? Give us a hint.
Well, I can give you a little hint, sure. Well, you know, I'm going to Vietnam for 2
I'm
weeks
excited about
with
that
the
one.
senior high school kids, and talking about the Dove schools that they put all over Vietnam. And that certainly is a Spirit of the Heartland show, just because we're taking our spirit from Winona over to another country. And then beyond that, well, there'll be special events coming up, and there'll be some more cooking shows. There'll be a lot of things happening, but I think everybody's going to have to watch to see.
Now, that leads me to ask you, so where do you come up with the subjects for your shows?
You know, it's wonderful, because so many people, now that I've been established here and I have been doing the show for 8 years, so many people know the show, and I'll get phone calls all the time and say, hey, you know, I've got this interesting story, would you like to do something on this? And, you know, I love that when they do that, because I know then they're really interested in telling the story. So that's generally how I get my ideas.
So really, if people have ideas, all they need to do is get in touch with you.
Yeah, I would love
HBC and
that.
get in touch with you.
Mm-hmm,
well, good.
sure.
We've got another little in there for you for some topics. Well, no, I was trying to think. I haven't seen all 200. I have seen probably excerpts of 99.9% of them. But I think my favorite ones are always the historical pieces, because for me, when I was writing, that was what I did, was research and worked with Historical Society. But I do have to say that some of the characters, if you will, that you have interviewed, Kenny Selway, and watching you go into the canoe and out into the backwaters and almost the bush, and dealing with the climate and the critters that are out there, and I really enjoyed that show. That was fun. And I also really liked the sheep show. That one came up with some surprises that most people here in the region didn't know went on with the wool and the products, the byproducts. So anyway, thanks, Joyce. I think our audience are going to be really pleased with knowing about the history, and congratulations on your 200th show. I can't imagine that when you started that's what you thought you would be doing.
Well, I hoped for it, and now it's come to fulfill a dream for me. So yeah, it's been wonderful. And now I think what I'll do is show the audience some excerpts from some of the shows.
All right, sounds great. Good luck in the next 200.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
In next week's show, we'll take a look at the last 8 years of Spirit of Winona and Spirit of the Heartland shows in the second part of Spirit 200. This has been Joyce Woodworth. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland and the second part of Spirit 200, which is the 200th Spirit Show produced for and aired on HBC Channel 25. In last week's show, we talked about how the first Spirit shows began in 2000 and how they developed into the 1/2-hour Spirit of the Heartland shown here each Saturday through Tuesday. In today's second part show, we'll take a look at some of those 200 segments and see what took place in Winona and the surrounding area over the first decade of the 21st century. The first half-hour show in August of 2000 began right here in Wyndham Park with Master Gardener Sharon Ropes, explaining all the different gardens surrounding the fountain. Since then, 10 other garden segments have been aired on the Spirit shows. Let's take a look at some of those shows right now.
It's a dark blue flower similar to this iris, so it's called monkshood. And we put that in the garden just so the garden wouldn't be too sweet. It does come with an interesting history from medieval England. It was known for a cure for unhappy marriages. And the trick is that monkshood is extremely poisonous. And it's said that wives would chop up the leaves and put them in a summer salad for their husbands, and that would be the end to their unhappy marriage. So we just planted that in our garden here for a little bit of fun. People might notice, if they're good gardeners at home, that there's weeds here, and that's sort of part of having a garden. You can be a slave to your garden, like your home, have it be immaculate, or you can enjoy it for what it is and tolerate a few weeds blowing in too.
I like that idea. And I also like the fact that you have the dill mixed in with the flowers, the herbs and the vegetables all mixed in with the flowers.
Well, there's a lot of old-fashioned old sayings and so on that go along with putting herbs next to some flowers. Helps them grow better, actually, and keeps insects away. They're a little repellent. So there's a natural philosophy, and isn't life like this, that nobody's exactly the same? We don't put all the same people together in the same room. It'd be boring. So same thing in the garden.
Mark's Pond at Valley Floral is certainly a good starting point if you're thinking of putting a pond in your yard. Bill McNeil is certainly happy with his decision for a pond and tells us how he developed the shade area that surrounds it.
This was actually a hot spot in our yard for years. This is a south and west exposure. And before we built the addition, this was all grass and heat. We talked with Mark Swartz, who was our landscape designer. Came up with the idea of a freestanding pergola. Given that we had shade, we had to go to shade plants. So we ended up with astilbe and cranesbill and the wonderful ever-blooming begonia. We do ferns, of course. These little heart-shaped leaf guys are barrenwort. They have really wonderful red and white flowers in the early spring. You can always use hosta in the shade, and we use a lot of hosta. So yeah, by necessity, we do shade gardening.
Every Monday evening throughout the summer, over 30 children gather behind Redeemer Lutheran Church for a gardening experience with the Master Gardeners. They choose vegetables and flowers from an array of plants and design their very own garden plot. Tell me about your garden.
Well, I hope to grow lots of vegetables and flowers because my mom likes to pick them off at the end of it, and it's very fun.
And what do you do with the vegetables?
We eat them. We give them to our grandpa and grandma and friends.
Today we're back in Peter Freese's garden on Lake Boulevard in Winona, Minnesota, to learn some very essential gardening tips for planting and growing a beautiful garden in our heartland climate. Peter Freese is truly a man who loves his garden. This is apparent throughout his yard. Wherever you look, there's beauty all around.
Any annual that you will find at your local nurseries will do fine in Minnesota. Like this here is a petunia. And normally when you buy them from the nurseries, they're going to be, they'll have flowers on them. They look real pretty, but the best way to do it when you go to transplant them is to actually cut the tops off. And depending on how root bound it is, I may want to take and loosen the roots up just a little bit before I plant it. When you first pull this out, the roots are all wound around. They're because of the container that they're in. So the first thing you want to do is free those roots up. That's why you loosen them up. That way when you put it in the ground, they'll immediately start growing out. Otherwise, they'll continue to grow in a circle.
Today we're on the grounds of the Watkins Manor. At one time there were very formal gardens around this home, especially on the west side of the house. They were extremely formal. And after Florence Watkins, the owner of the home, passed away in the mid-50s, these gardens slowly faded away. Years of neglect turned the area into an eyesore. A while ago, the Watkins Company donated the necessary funds to revitalize the West Gardens, and Neil Anderson, a landscape designer, was hired to bring the gardens back to a semblance of what they once were.
Construction of the Watkins home began in 1924 and was complete in 1927 for the Paul Watkins family. The landscaping for the home began immediately. Holman Olson landscape architects from Minneapolis were hired to design the formal gardens. Huge trees were brought in, hedges were planted, steps and stone paths were installed, a pond was dug, and unique to most gardens in Winona, ornamentation was featured throughout the grounds. Garden ornamentation such as urns, stone benches, and statuary were very popular in the early 20th century America. This pleasure was reserved only for the very rich, however. Ornamental gardens petered out during World War II and remained unfashionable until the last 10 or 15 years, when we have seen a major resurgence. In today's gardens, ornaments and greenery go hand in hand in everyone's garden, rich or poor. With gardening now the #1 hobby in America, a garden isn't complete without some well-chosen accent among the plantings. Beyond the sunken garden, on this side, were 4 life-size statues of the 4 seasons. In front of these statues was a large stone cauldron set on a wellhead and smaller stone vases set on pedestals around the stone wall. On the west end of this garden stood another stone cauldron with 2 pedestal vases on either side. A lovely spot, perhaps, for a marriage proposal. In fact, this is where Florence Watkins' granddaughter was proposed to, and today she has this lovely piece standing in her own garden in Oklahoma. The 4 seasons also still exist in her garden. Winona, Minnesota, incorporated in 1858 as a city on the Mississippi, and the surrounding heartland of America has had 150 years to build fascinating homes and buildings. Tours of some of these places have been featured on the Spirit shows. Here are some of the highlights.
One thing that Winona is truly blessed with are many grand Victorian homes. This one, for instance, which is near Wyndham Park, is an exceptionally grand example.
This Queen Anne Victorian home was designed by architect Charles Maybury in 1886. The detail on the outside of the house is incredible and could only be duplicated today at incredible cost. The dragon scale shingles, for instance, consist of 7 different shapes, all laid in interesting patterns and embellished with wood-carved ornamentation. The Victorian porch is accented with cross-connected spindles and arched passageways between the curved posts. The corner of the porch is highlighted with a sunburst arch. The eaves are sectioned by brackets. Circles and rectangulars and squares are included for added detail. Curved molding is added beneath the windows and provides us with a real gingerbread look.
The current residents, Don and Linda Olson, happen to be antique buffs and consequently a perfect match for this elegant, stately house. At the holiday season, their antique decorations give us a glimpse of what Christmas looked like when these houses were built. Today we get to visit with Linda and take a step back into the Victorian era.
I've done a lot of research on Victorian homes and tried to do things appropriately. I'm kind of a purist, and colors and those kinds of things. When we bought the house, it was in pretty sad disrepair. But the beautiful woodwork was dried out but not painted, so we knew the house could be salvaged and put back together. And we've been doing that ever since.
Oh, and I noticed it looks, when you walk in, it looks like it's just absolutely perfect, like it was just built yesterday. You've done a beautiful job.
Thank you. It's constant. As you well know, living in an old home, it's constant upkeep, and it's a labor of love. If you didn't love doing it, you just couldn't do it.
When you bought it 12 years ago or 13, whenever it was, it didn't have the woodwork, I understand, because it was split up into 6 apartments.
Tell me about your woodwork. Your woodwork is just absolutely fabulous.
After we had purchased the house, we had several antiques we had purchased from Greg Cowles, and so in visiting with him, he said, I know of some woodwork that some people have purchased on an auction, probably I think in '76, and stored it. And he gave us Nick Edstrom's name, and we contacted him, and we purchased the woodwork from him. And I don't know how many loads we brought up here, but we just brought it and put it in. And it took us, I'd say, 2 years of just tearing out walls and things to get the house back to what it originally was, as far as doors and that type of thing went.
The woodwork was pulled out of a home in Winona located at 259 West Wabasha Street, which in 1976 was the parish house for Central Lutheran Church. Prior to that, it had been Winona's orphanage.
Now, there was a real surprise with that woodwork, wasn't there? Can you tell me the story about that?
About 3 years ago, we got the original blueprints from grandson of the fellow that had owned this house, and we were surprised to know that it was the same architect for our house as the house that the woodwork came from, C.G. Mayberry.
I understand that when you brought the woodwork in, it almost like fit the spaces perfectly.
Yes, it did. We had no open staircase in the house at that time, and it's amazing, the chamfered paneling, the railings, the newel posts, everything. It just fit our house.
The fact that the woodwork fits so perfectly in this house, does it almost seem like perhaps the house in Winona was designed exactly like this house?
Quite a bit. I think there was a very similar look to it.
The grandest room in the manor house was built at the back of the house. It looks very much like a cathedral. It is very Gothic in design, as we see by the windows on the outside. We enter the room from the reception hall past the beautiful hand-carved linen fold doors. During Watkins' time, you would walk through a set of wrought iron doors built by the famous craftsman Yellen from New York, and step upon one of the 500 oriental carpets throughout the house, including a Royal Kashan carpet made in New York for $11,000, designed especially for this space.
Everyone should have one of these attached to the back of their house. So tell me, what do you think Paul and Florence used it for?
It was used for music. It's really, if you've ever been here for any concert, it's a wonderful place to hear music. And primarily this room is here to house their Aeolian organ and the grand piano.
The organ was built and designed for the Watkins Manor in 1925 by the Aeolian Organ Company in the East. It took 5 boxcars to ship it to Winona and be reassembled in 1927. It was considered then to be one of the largest in the world. The console to the organ is located in the library portion of the room near the entrance. 4,000 pipes are behind the wall at the south end of the room. Behind the 2 smaller linen fold doors, which are intricately carved with musical instruments, lies the organ chamber with pipes as small as a pencil and ranging to 20-inch square wooden pipes. The pipes go from the top of the 2-story room all the way down to the floor. 1,000 pipes are behind the wall in the minstrel's balcony, which is above the entrance to the room, and 1,000 pipes, which provide the echo, hang behind the fireplace.
Let's go in and meet Greg and take a look at this Winona treasure.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi, Greg.
We enter the center hall with French doors on the left, leading to a parlor and extending on to arched doorways and interesting light fixtures. From the hall, we go into the front parlor, which is stunningly beautiful. The antiques in this room are exquisite.
The porch that was on the house when I bought the house was a porch that was probably added in the 1930s. The original porch had probably rotted away years before, and so they rebuilt sort of a makeshift porch in the 30s that really was inappropriate style-wise to this house. And it only covered the front door. It wasn't a large, expansive porch like you see now. And typical of the Victorian era, porches were very massive, and they extended across the front. Sometimes they wrapped around the side. And each period during a certain era, for instance, the Victorian Italianate period, which is this house, has a certain style to their porch. Queen Anne has another style. And what I did is I spent 3 or 4 years just studying Italianate houses, and I would go to as many as I could find that still retained some elements of their original porch. And based on that, I determined what style porch pillars that I was going to make and how the ornamentation would come out on the house and the length of the overhang and the brackets. And so every little component I could substantiate by having examples of others that were still in existence. And based on that, I designed the porch, and Kim Mills and Mark Henningsgaard from Winona built it for me, and they had their work cut out for them because the blueprint was in my head.
Today we're in Wabasha, Minnesota at the historic Anderson House. This is currently a bed and breakfast owned by Teresa and Mike Smith. Today we're going to get to meet with them, and they're going to give us a little bit of the history of this historic building, and we get to take a tour.
Hello, welcome to the historic Anderson House.
Well, thank you.
First weekend we were open, 9 out of 10 people who walked through the door asked about the cats. So we listened to that for about a week. The cats are part of our family now. We only have 11 rooms that they're allowed in, so that we can also take care of the needs of any guests that might have allergies. So we have 11 cat rooms and 11 non-cat rooms that the cats are not allowed in.
Well, that certainly distinguishes you from other bed and breakfasts.
This is our bridal suite.
Oh, this is charming. Very nice. Oh, this is lovely. I love this quilt. And the one on the wall is gorgeous, too. It looks like an Amish quilt.
They were all here when we took over.
Okay. Now you have another, what you call a bridal suite at the other end.
Yes.
Where the other jacuzzi is?
Correct.
Describe that room to me.
That has a jacuzzi and a shower. The view out of the turret is what they really enjoy there, because you can see you've got the full view of the Mississippi River and downtown Wabasha. Very old, ornate furniture. It's beautiful furniture.
The Burke family runs their furniture business downstairs and has turned the upstairs into their living quarters. They've invited us today to join them in this historic building for a Christmas tour. Reminds me of a New York loft. I can't believe how high the ceilings are. It's just gorgeous.
They're 12 and a half feet tall. We wanted to keep an open feel, but we didn't want the industrial look. We wanted more of a traditional home. It's 4,500 square feet up here, but it's very livable. It's cozy. I guess that's kind of a small word for a big space, but it works well. From the kitchen, you can work at the counter, you can eat in the kitchen, you can still see a program, listen to music.
Well, I love the openness, how your kitchen is connected with your family room.
Well, my husband and I designed the house ourselves. Our old house had 5 doorways through the kitchen, and no matter what you did, if you opened an oven door, someone was right behind you, or opening a door onto your refrigerator. We knew we wanted to be able to have people gather in the kitchen, because no matter where you live, that's where they're going to end up. But we wanted people out of the work triangle. So it's a very tight work triangle we designed, but you could have 20 people stand in my kitchen and still have that triangle to yourself. We staggered the heights of the cabinets in the kitchen in the original plans because we never dreamed that we could get our ceilings as straight as they turned out, and we were trying to fool the eye. But the whole design and layout of the house was based around the pillars that you'll see every here and there. It was all open, one big open space.
This is the way the room looked when the Burke family began the renovation in March of 2001. Along with other family members and friends, they gutted out the walls, tore down the bricks, planned the design of a new home, and rebuilt the large empty space into beautiful living quarters. 7 months later, they were ready to move in and enjoy their first Christmas in their new home.
Back behind Sugarloaf in one of Winona's secluded neighborhoods stand two very unique homes called Lustron homes. Unlike all the other homes in the neighborhood, or in Winona for that matter, they are not built on the traditional wooden frame, but rather they are made of steel inside and out. Today we're going to learn about the history and construction of these homes, meet the occupants, and take a tour of the inside. We'll also find out where two more are located in the Winona area, and in the second part of the Lustron home story, we will find out about a fifth Lustron that is being converted into a trendy coffee shop.
It was 1946, and millions of men had recently returned home from defending their country in World War II. Hundreds were returning to Winona, coming home to young wives and starting families, and they needed affordable houses to move into. Winona families were interested, and in the late 1940s, 5 Lustron homes were built in the Winona area. The Lustron home captured the attention of the nation, and inquiries poured in from all over for the metal home created on an assembly line. The design was precise and required exact fabrication of each metal piece. 3 designs were worked on: the Westchester 2 and 3 bedroom, and a more economical plan called the Newport. The Westchester 2 bedroom is the most common and is the home we see in Winona.
The living room is just so nice and open in this house. I mean, you'd think it'd be so tiny, but really it's a nice space.
They had a lot of ways to utilize a small space. Built-in shelving, cabinetry, and etc. was one of the features of the home.
This Lustron stands on Mankato Avenue underneath a fabulous sycamore tree. Stoplights and a new street were recently added next to it to give access to the new Menards store. It is proving to be one of the busiest traffic spots in town. Just a year ago, it stood as a private residence. Winonans have driven by it for over 50 years as a maize yellow Winchester 2-bedroom Lustron home. It has recently been converted, however, into Mugby Junction, a drive-through coffee and smoothie shop. The bells are played from a room within the tower, which lies 3 stories below. It is reached from a spiral staircase which continues on up to the bells themselves. The room is square with wainscoting wrapped around it and a collection of 100 bells from all over the nation, placed lovingly there by its former occupant, John Duell. The console, which was updated in the 50s to accommodate 3 more bells, stands at the center.
Mainly we should talk about John Duell, who was a music teacher in junior high school when the school was across the street, and came over here 7 days a week for just about 53 years. He passed away in 2000. He seldom missed a day, and when he couldn't play, why, we had several people who helped. And I was lucky enough to be one after I graduated from Hamlin and came back here to work for Hal Leonard.
Now, I heard some really interesting stories about John Duell. For instance, after the fire, that same day of the fire, it occurred in the morning, and then at 5 o'clock, I understand that he actually came up in the tower, which was still smoldering, and actually somehow played the bells.
Maybe it's apocryphal, but whatever it is, it's a good story, and I think he really did it. Keith Schwab was here, and they were worried about the fact that they didn't know what the damage was to the tower. Had there been flames where the bells are suspended, the one bell weighs over a ton, and they were afraid they might fall. So they got up there with ladders and couldn't go all the way up here, but got through to it. And everything was frozen because the fire department had been spraying water. They couldn't play from the console because it was frozen solid. And I believe that John either had a hammer or something in his pocket and hit them a couple times just to say they sounded on that day.
The Spirit Shows have presented over 30 tours of homes and buildings in the Heartland area. Each one brings out an interesting story, such as the burning and rebuilding of the Central Methodist Church. In next week's show, we'll see more segments of the 199 shows presented on the Spirit of Winona and the Spirit of the Heartland. This has been Joyce Woodworth. Thanks for joining me. Please join me again next week for the third part of Spirit 200.
Hello, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of the Heartland, the Spirit of Winona, and Spirit 200, which is the third part of the 200th Spirit Show aired on HBC Channel 25. Trying to sum up 200 shows in 2 half-hour time slots is sort of like writing your life story in an hour's time. It just couldn't be done. So therefore, I've added the third part of the summary of the first 8 years of Spirit of Winona and Spirit of the Heartland shows. Hope you enjoy it.
History documentaries actually make up most of the Spirit shows. 31 have been completed thus far. Each one pulls out very interesting facts from our heritage. Here's a sample of some of those facts from our Winona past.
The building was designed by Charles G. Mayberry with the help of his son Jefferson in 1888. Mayberry came to Winona in 1856 from New York with his wife Rebecca. The two of them had 10 children. Mayberry was Winona's premier architect during that era. He was responsible for many of Winona's grand buildings. In the 1860s, he designed all of Winona's school buildings: Central Grade School, Jackson School, Kosciuszko School, Lincoln School, Washington School, and Madison and Jefferson schools, none of which are still standing. The show on the Winona County Courthouse included not only a history of the building, but also a tour of how the building looked then. You may remember this. Now, I understand that the damage that the courthouse is experiencing right now all began in this room.
Yes, it is. The ceiling came down. You can, if you look up, you can see where the ceiling was attached, was a drop ceiling. And when that came down, it took 4 of the sprinkler heads off. And the sprinkler started filling the room with water. And we judged it at 3 feet of water in the courtroom before it finally gave way and started going out into the hallway. By the time we had arrived here, it had gone down because it had broken loose through the doors and started going out through the building.
So then over the weekend, the water seeped down into the other levels down below?
Right.
Okay, and that's what caused all the damage below us. Right?
Correct.
A follow-up tour was conducted after the renovation in 2004.
So you'll see throughout the building that there'll be strongly patterned carpetings in the hallways, in the courtrooms.
But most of my knowledge of this building comes after the 1970s renovation. And when I look at it now compared to then, the difference is quite striking and quite an improvement, I have to say.
What are some of the features of it now that you like the most?
Well, if you start with the most superficial of things, the colors are wonderful now. Mm-hmm. It's a much more comfortable environment to work in because we have this beautiful warm color palette going on with the warm reds in the carpets and the warm greens, the warm browns of the woodwork. It used to be much harsher. The light was harsher, the colors were harsher, and so that is one thing. The configuration of the building is dramatically different. We have a lot more room in which to operate, and it's much more comfortable, not only as someone who works here as a professional, but also for members of the public.
Today, April 17, 2001, the river has reached its crest for the spring. It has reached 20.2 feet, which is 7 feet above the flood stage. If this dike were not here, we would be currently watching our citizens scrambling with sandbags to keep this raging river from flooding our homes.
Being a river town, Winona has dealt with floods since its onset 150 years ago. Back in the 1800s, no matter how long the skirts and how high the water, the ladies didn't let the flooding spoil their day of shopping. The high water records were recorded at the levee from 1880 until 1951. F.J. Fugina kept track of the high water marks from 1880 to 1920. The first recorded flood on the levee stone shows the water crested in 1880, 3.8 feet above flood stage being 13 feet. The next highest flood recorded on this marker is at the top. In 1951, the water level reached 17.4 feet.
In recent years, it really started in 1951 when we reached the river stage of 17.4, and much of the city flooded. They didn't know how to really go about fighting a flood, shutting off the storm sewers, and that sort of thing. And so quite a bit of the city flooded in 1951. Then the next year, 1952, reached the river stage of 17.9, and there was flooding all the way up to like 4th Street, 4th and Olmsted. Houses had water over the first floor. So much of the area flooded, much of the city flooded in 1952. And that's when the council passed a resolution to ask the Corps of Engineers to build a permanent dike to protect the city of Winona.
Before this dike was built, however, the citizens of Winona had to struggle together to hold the water back, and it was at this time that sandbagging became a way of life during flood season in Winona. Boys were called out of school, and the people band together to fill gunny sacks throughout the days and deep into the nights. From 1952 until 1965, there was no major flooding in Winona, and then the big one hit. 1965 reached 20.8 feet.
This lake is truly the jewel of our city. Today we're going to find out how some of the features of the lake were developed, and we're also going to find out how the people of today enjoy its recreational activities.
At the turn of the last century, Lake Winona was close to becoming a marsh. The wheat farming that started here in 1860 caused severe soil erosion, and the lake was filling with that eroded soil. Ruth Babcock, who lived on the south side of the lake, took a picture of her uncle Hal Buck in a rowboat. She wrote a description of the lake at this time. The margin of the lake could hardly be called a shore. It was a marsh ankle to knee-deep with bulrushes and blue flag abundant. There were 2 bridges across Lake Winona at this time. One was a streetcar or trolley bridge, which went across at Dakota Street. The other bridge was used for horse and buggies, and later the automobile. That was the Huff Street Bridge, which met Lake Boulevard on the south side of the lake. In 1905, there was a push by the Winona Park and Drive Improvement Association, headed by F.S. Bell, to condemn the 174 acres of land around the lake so that it could be purchased and made into a park.
It's that time of year again. It's hot and sticky, and Steamboat Days is here. The carnival's in town, there'll be a parade, a queen pageant, and there'll be fireworks. It's probably the most exciting time in the year for Winonans, especially for children. Today we're going to find out about some of the festivities from Steamboat Days in the past, and we're going to find out what's going on here today.
The parade used to be on 3rd Street. The carnival was always on Main Street. And we used to have the powerboat races. In fact, I sold bottles of pop down at the powerboat races for 10 cents, and I'd get a penny out of each bottle I sold. In 48, they decided to change it to a Steamboat Days, and what they did then was there was a lot of old paddle wheel riverboat captains, and for the first Steamboat Days, they invited all those people to come to a banquet, and they had it at the old Hotel Winona. They continued that tradition for several years until there weren't too many more of those old Steamboat Days captains around.
In 1946, Winona selected Vivian Glenday as the first Miss Winona to participate in the Minneapolis Aquatennial Queen of the Lakes contest, and in 1948, Rosalie Critchfield was selected. This happened to be the first year for the Steamboat Days event, so along with the Miss Winona, a Miss Steamboat Days was selected, plus 2 attendants. Out of a group of over 30 entrants, Patricia Weishorn, later known as Pat Heisey, became the first Miss Steamboat Days. From then on, Miss Winona and Miss Steamboat Days became one and the same.
We used to have the stage show outside. In fact, years ago, they used to bring a barge in and park it down at the levee and put a stage on that. Well, they got away from that, and we used to build a stage down there at the foot of Center Street every year. And then we used to put the 2x8 planks on concrete cinder blocks. Can't do that anymore because of OSHA and things like that, so we kind of got rid of the outdoor shows. And we used to pack them down there. I mean, everybody used to come down there. We used to have the Queen pageant outside.
The Queen pageants were strictly beauty pageants until the mid-50s, when Miss Winona was aligned with the Miss America Scholarship Program, and talent and intellect became significant in the selection of a queen. The stage shows, along with the Queen pageants, were held at the levee until 1972.
Baseball was a part of Winona since Winona was settled in the 1850s, starting with stickball in the street to organize baseball teams on a permanent baseball field. And one man has been a big part of this baseball history. He was the manager of Winona Chiefs for 25 years. His name is Al Smith. Hi, Al. Welcome to the
Joyce.
Spirit of Winona.
Yeah, nice to be here. Good to see you again.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Al, give me a brief history of baseball in Winona, would you?
Well, it goes back further than a lot of people realize, and I would say probably in the early 1900s, where they had industrial teams. Like if you had a large manufacturing plant, you would have a baseball team, and then they'd probably play another industrial plant. And it went on like that. And actually, you had sponsors then, too, way back in those days. And that was probably way before the Winona Roses or the Polish National Alliance, which is the PNAs. At one time, there's a great rivalry in town between Rose Joswick, and he had a team that was called Winona Roses, oddly enough, and the PNAs. Now, the PNAs were the East End team, and the Roses were the West End team. And they played some of the same teams, and every now and then they'd play themselves. And it was sometimes, especially when the Roses played the PNAs, the ballpark was jammed. They were all around the outfield fence. They were standing everywhere because there was nothing but standing room only. The Chiefs came about, and it was 1948 or 49, somewhere in that neighborhood.
The Winona Chiefs' heyday was in the mid-50s. Winonans packed the stands at East End Gabrick Park to watch the semi-pro team play. An average of 2,200 people per game in the early to mid-50s was common. Nighttime games under the lights were the most popular. With no television to watch, Winonans came out to watch their Chiefs play. If they stayed home, they listened to Rod Hertz or Chuck Williams' play-by-play broadcast on KWNO. Despite the mosquitoes and fish flies, baseball was the #1 spectator sport and recreational activity during the 1950s, and the Winona Chiefs were the most popular men in town.
I'm currently standing inside the Polish Museum, which used to house the Laird Norton Lumber Company. Today we're going to find out what these two organizations have in common. We're going to take a look at our Polish history, and we're also going to find out what the Polish Heritage Society and the Polish Museum do to celebrate Winona's Polish heritage today. Father, tell me, what is the connection between the Polish people and the Laird Norton Lumber Company?
Before 1910, from about 1860, we were their labor supply. There were 2,000 people involved in the sawmills in Winona, and 1,200 of them were Polish. I think the other 800 probably took the money home, but I think we did the work. The first Polish people came here in 1855, and they probably were solicited by the people that owned Winona at the time. It was still a very tiny community of only 200, and the people who owned those 4 sections that Winona was split into would advertise on the East Coast or in Europe to say land's available, jobs are plentiful, and a couple...
The Laird Norton Lumber Company was one of 5 sawmills in Winona, along with the Winona Lumber Company, Empire Lumber Company, Yeomans, and Scroff and Aaron's. The 1,200 Poles worked 12-hour days and made $1.25 a day, which was considered an excellent wage at that time. They worked in the bluffs, logging the trees, and on the log rafts of the Mississippi River that may cover 2 to 3 acres of logs. They worked in the sawmills and the finished woodworking shops.
Winona is a generous town and always has been.
Some of our most cherished sites and buildings were given to the city by our more wealthy and generous forefathers. Today, we're going to learn about the philanthropists of our past and their generous legacies.
Winona citizens have been giving to Winona since its onset. Small, unnoticed gifts of money in the collection plate to help support a church, to large buildings that provide a better life for every member of the community.
I think without a doubt the granddaddy of the biggest name, I think, historically that we've ever seen here in Winona is John Latch. John Latch, without a doubt, was an extremely generous person. In his lifetime, he bought and donated thousands of acres of land up and down the Mississippi River.
This bridge, known as the Old Wagon Bridge, is really the newest of several bridges built over this waterway. This concrete 12-arch bridge was built in 1917. Before that, a number of wooden bridges were built here. John Latch, who was born in Dodge, Wisconsin in 1860, would travel to Winona in a horse and buggy with his father from the foothills of the Wisconsin Bluffs through the marshy lowlands now known as Argamain Park, across a number of bridges to the edge of what is now known as Latch Island. Here, a ferry known as the Turtle would carry him over to the center street in Winona. In 1886, a more substantial timber bridge was built, which connected Argamain to Latch Island. The iron train bridge crossed the Mississippi a bit west of this ferry landing. It was constructed in 1870 and collapsed the first time a train went over it. It was rebuilt several times after that and finally built solid in 1889. Remnants of it still stand. By 1892, John Latch was 32 years old. He had moved to Winona at 7 years of age when his father opened a grocery store here. It was this year he became a partner with his father in the wholesale grocery business. And that same year, an interstate bridge was built east of the railroad bridge that connected Winona at Main Street to the timber bridge on Latch Island. This bridge had two 90-degree turns as it dropped into Winona. It was made out of iron and had a wooden planked platform. A toll was charged for anyone and anything that crossed from Wisconsin into Minnesota.
This bottle represents one man's clever ideas that turned the contents of this bottle into a multi-million-dollar business. By creating a store at your door, the concept that developed into the biggest direct sales operation in the world, J.R. Watkins built the foundation for a business empire and turned his family into the richest family in the history of Winona County.
There are 13 categories of spirit shows, and history is just one. However, Winona and the Heartland's history is included in every show. Take the shows about the Mississippi, for example, of which 12 have been produced.
Steamboats are a big part of our heritage, and today we are fortunate to tour the largest and grandest steamboat ever built, the American Queen. Is that a tradition that the boats would have a ladies' parlor and a men's area?
Yes, in the old days the ladies' parlor was completely separate, no men allowed, and then of course the men had a smoking room where they could smoke their cigars and no women were allowed.
This would be the place where the ladies would come and have their tea and maybe sew or knit.
You can see on the table. That's one tradition we've kept here. Sailing, there's I think a 3:30 or 4 o'clock afternoon tea service with tea and the crumpets and all that.
Across the river from Winona is Latch Island. On the other side of that island stands numerous boathouses. The term boathouses is really a misnomer here because most of the so-called boathouses do not house boats. They're actually river houses with plastic barrels underneath to keep them afloat, and inside are the residences of over 100 or so people, some of whom live year-round in these interesting establishments. Today we're going to take a closer look at these funky houses and meet some of Winona's most unique individuals.
The so-called boathouse community lies in Bathhouse Slough, where the old arch wagon bridge stands. its concrete pedestal standing at the entrance as if entering a special gated community on the Mississippi River.
Well, I'm looking for the whitest sandy beach where the coconuts within my hands reach. A beautiful girl sings a lullaby, singing to the sea in the tropic sky.
I choose one of the wooden boardwalks that leads to Chris Parnell's boathouse dwelling. He actually has 3 floating houses that are connected by floating docks.
Build my cabana by the mangrove tree. I'm gonna stretch out in my hammock to the ocean breeze. We're gonna set sail to the new...
I have the feeling I'm in the Jamaican tropics rather than 5 minutes away from downtown Winona.
Schools hold excellent stories and give us an opportunity to see the area's youth in action. 12 school-related stories have been included on the Spirit shows. Here's a sample of some of them.
Kids of all ages came to recognize Central's 70th year and to share their memories of the years when Central was a part of their everyday life. One of Central's former teachers, who actually began her teaching career before this building was built, shares her thoughts on how teaching has changed and how it has remained the same.
They are so much more worldly wise now.
What star are you on?
I'm on Makes Good Choices, which is right behind you.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means that you make good choices and not only like choosing the right thing, but making sure that you help other people to make the good choices too.
I think school is a really cool place to be.
You do? What do you like about it?
Well, I like learning and I like making new friends.
How do you like WK school?
Because it has a lot of Phi-Ed sometimes and art.
Dodgeball.
Well, I think there's nice teachers and, well, there's nice, polite kids in WK.
We enter the kindergarten room and find that many of the activities are the same ones we all took part in way back when. And painting at the easel brings back a warm memory for each and every one of us.
That's what our world is like today. It's become so small, and we travel much more, and this way we get to learn about different cultures right here in our hometown.
The little boy entering kindergarten today may have been born in Winona, or he may have been born in Mexico, China, Bosnia, Croatia, Vietnam, Laos, or Bulgaria. Jefferson now prides itself on being a multicultural school.
I love to present special events on Spirit. They are a happening in the area and always turn out a fun show. Here's a sample of the 26 special event shows presented on the Spirit of Winona and the Spirit of the Heartland.
She has pretty much adopted this calf. We show the cow calf at the shows wherever we go, and this calf is pretty much hers, marked hers as Me Baby.
So is that his name, Me Baby?
Me Baby. That's what she says anyways.
Great. Sounds like you're having a wonderful time.
We have a lot of fun every show we go to, and we have a big cattle family which consists of over 5 different families.
We want to incorporate the white community in that spiritual aspect of healing and reconciliation. And I think a lot of people will sense that and feel that, and it's going to be a real positive thing for the city of Winona to be the one to initiate that.
The city of Winona can be truly proud of initiating the Dakota Gathering and continuing on year after year in welcoming the Dakota people back to their homeland and reaching out throughout the year to the impoverished reservations, the Crow Creek in South Dakota and the Santee in Nebraska, to help in whatever way we can.
Winona has seen its own holiday lighted parade. It may not be as spectacular as the one down Nicollet Mall, but it is still beautiful.
the gray days can be quite a bummer. Here's what gets us through when there's snow on the barbecue. Dreams of the first bratwurst of summer. Now all our friends have called and our funds are finally full. A certain savory smoke is in the air. I'm following my nose where everybody goes. Straight to the first bratwurst of summer.
I'm Joyce Woodworth. Thank you for joining me today on the Spirit of Winona when we were down at the levee enjoying the sights and sounds of the Victorian Fair. Till next time, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.
Thank you for joining me here today in my edit studio for my 200th show about the Spirit of Winona and Spirit of the Heartland shows. I also want to thank you sincerely for all your support throughout the years. And in the future, I promise I'll keep presenting stories about you, about Winona, and about the Heartland. Till next week, enjoy the Spirit of the Heartland.
This show is dedicated to the people who have shared themselves with us on the Spirit shows and are no longer with us in person, but always in spirit.